Welcome, and thank you for tuning in for another episode of the Sitecore Water Cooler, the casual conversation podcast dedicated to covering all things related to Sitecore, including product updates, implementation insights, getting the most out of your Sitecore investment, and more. I'm your guest host today, Maggie Burke, Sitecore Program Manager and Sitecore MVP at AmericanEagle.com. Search. It's a pretty critical component to any web presence. The more information you have on your site, whether it be products, services, tutorials, you name it, the more important it is to have a robust search tool that allows the users on your website to easily navigate and find what they're looking for. The more effortless it is for your audience to do that, the more likely they are to ultimately convert. So that brings us to another product in the Sitecore composable ecosystem, Sitecore Search, an AI-driven headless content discovery platform that Sitecore acquired in 2021. We are joined today by Senior Sitecore Solution Architect Jared Arnofsky, who has been instrumental in some of our latest Sitecore Search implementations, and will share insights around the development plans, features of the tool, and more. Jared, welcome to the water cooler.
Thanks for having me.
So Jared, it's pretty cool to have you here because you're actually in person. We've had you on the podcast a few times, but it's always kind of been a virtual element, but you've actually been able to come into Chicago and be with us in person today. So always very exciting. Are you enjoying your time in Chicago thus far?
Yeah, it's a great place. I like the food.
Good.
A lot of Portillo's. Shout out to Portillo's.
Yes.
I like that a lot.
Always a shout out to Portillo's. Great. So when we talk about Sitecore Search, and, again, going into the fact that search is going to be a really important component for anybody on their website, what are some planning considerations that you feel like you've faced in these Sitecore Search implementation products or projects in general? Because I think we've hit on it quite a bit on this podcast that it's important to really properly plan for things, because if you just dive right into the development, that's where you're going to hit a lot of sticking points. You're going to hit a lot of roadblocks or bottlenecks. If you properly plan it out, you're the better and the smoother that the implementation phase is going to go. So are there any areas that you think are important to consider when planning out for Sitecore Search?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think your sources is the first thing that you want to talk about and you want to think about. Like when we are building out these search platforms, in many of the times there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 10 sources that you need to pull into Sitecore Search, and just identifying what's in and what's out. Sometimes clients have sources that maybe are more internal and they don't actually want it in their search, or they have something that maybe isn't as relevant, maybe like manuals or something like that they don't particularly care about getting back in the main site. So if you're building out like a federated search and you have lots of different sources, just identifying those sources and figuring out what you want to pull into your search, what's important, and following those business decisions and recommendations that we want to leverage and use. Sitemaps is a big one. So you'd think that like an XML sitemap is something easy that someone always has on their sites, but many times they're out of date, many times they're static. So just making sure your sitemap is there, first of all, it's crawlable, and making sure that it's updated and it's kept, dynamic. And, Sitecore, for example, if you're going to publish your content, making sure that your CMS is outputting your proper sitemap and it's set up correctly.
Right.
So sometimes it's just considerations of just like, hey, how can we get this sitemap working correctly and updated correctly, because we need to leverage that to crawl in Sitecore Search.
Right. What about anything with metadata and like taxonomy stuff? Because I feel like that's always been a really important piece when it comes to planning out, even no matter the tool, right? It's really going to come down to just any sort of search project, the importance of actually thinking through that taxonomy and kind of what facets you're going to really pull from. Because a lot of times people think, I want to go super granular with it, but then you could end up with no search results if you get too in the weeds with it. But you want to get to a point where you are serving up relevant results for people and that they're able to find things easily. So is taxonomy another thing that maybe you kind of think it's worth going through and kind of seeing what your content sources are going to look like?
Yeah, absolutely. Like there's so many, as content authors and people that run business units, like they're very in the weeds of certain tags and taxonomies and how they're tagging their content with metadata and stuff. But there's certain use cases where we might want to expose that to people in search. And there's certain use cases where maybe if we complicate it too much, we might not want to. When you have multiple sources, then you also want to kind of decide, well, what taxonomy and metadata is relevant across all of my sources.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have like one source, it's less complicated. You could just say, yeah, like give me everything, or like give me the top 6 things and let's agree upon it.
Right.
But if you're using many sources, you need a discussion like, is this metadata or this facet relevant
Mm-hmm.
to all these sources? Like, can we make this be a good user experience if we're using, product type or something, for example?
Right.
So like, and then for Sitecore Search, when we are crawling these sources, we're using a data extractor
Mm-hmm.
within Sitecore Search, and then we need to extract from our metadata fields and our facet fields and things that we put in our HTML in the markup, but we need to make sure that that stuff is there. So like, often we might have the things that we want to search by, but it might not be accessible or available on every page.
Right.
And it needs to be standardized so we can like crawl it efficiently and get that data.
Mm-hmm.
So it's often like something we've done in the past is like we put together like a matrix across like all of our sources, and then kind of identify what, with our strategy teams and stuff, and saying what is something that we can use here that is, relevant across the board.
Right.
Identify those fields for metadata, identify those taxonomies, and then, go to the client with our agreement. Like, this is kind of what we're thinking. And then we collaboratively work with them and figure out what they want.
Perfect. Yeah, because that also makes it a seamless user experience, right? Because you're not just having facets in taxonomy that only apply to certain content pieces. Building out that matrix and kind of going through that strategy with it, and then aligning with the client really gets you guys on the same page before you get to implementation. Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
So then going into implementation, right? That's kind of the crux of what you do with it, Jared. So talking through the Sitecore Search implementation, are there any areas that you feel like were relevant or kind of exciting when it got into the actual development side of implementing Sitecore Search?
Yeah, so we've done it a couple ways now.
Mm-hmm.
Sitecore Search gives you a REST API, so you can implement with whatever you want to implement it with. And that's been successful. Something relatively new and that we've been using now lately is Sitecore has built out a React component SDK. And that's really cool because it's essentially like all of your components that you need to run your search. You can pull down the repo and run it like on its own without it being integrated into your solution. You set up a couple configurations and stuff, and start setting up your sources and stuff within the console for Sitecore Search, like in their cloud console. And then you can already like see it functioning. You can see your facets starting to pull in. You can see your content starting to be there.
Very cool.
So that's pretty cool. And some cool stuff. It has like analytics and stuff already built into it. So
nice.
If you leverage their React SDK, say you're using like a Next.js front end application for your headless app, then you can leverage a lot of the really cool tools that Sitecore has made for us, such as the SDK. Nice.
Very cool. And I think the other part too is that it's important to note that this doesn't have to work with Sitecore, right? You don't have to be using Sitecore as a CMS. You can get Sitecore Search and it can run agnostically on any sort of React site, correct? They don't need
any site. It doesn't even have to be React.
Nice.
So like you can decide to host your Sitecore Search within Vercel, within XM Cloud, like your search platform yourself, if you'd like to integrate it there. But the React SDK can be hosted anywhere that you could host a React application, and you can use the REST API, and you can build your own custom application with your own front end framework and leverage that as well. So it's agnostic. And then the sites that you are crawling, those don't have to be Sitecore as well. Obviously, they can be whatever you want it to be. We have a client that has 10 sources or so, and one of them is Salesforce, 2 of them are custom applications, etc.
Very cool. Very cool. So is there anybody from, again, I think we go back to this with a lot of the different products that we've implemented through this kind of Sitecore ecosystem in terms of external teams that we've worked with and things like that. And it really feels, again, like it's marching towards that kind of end goal together. Is there anybody that, in terms of the Sitecore Search piece, that has been kind of helpful or instrumental during these implementation products?
Yeah, Sitecore has like a team of technical partner advisors that we leverage on all of our XM Cloud projects. We're leveraging them on our Sitecore Search projects. I think I've talked about this before in some of my other podcasts, but they're just a soundboard, someone to work problems through, and they're super helpful in Really glad to have them help us on these projects.
Absolutely. I think it's a very exciting feature that Sitecore is really trying to build up with this PTA team. So happy to hear about it and see it in action. So,
and you find yourself working on them with them on multiple projects.
Yep.
So then you build like friendships and like relationships.
Exactly.
With them. Yeah.
Again, it's that one team mentality, which is it's really going to be helpful to making the success of these projects because we all have the same goal in mind, right? So, very cool. So then looking at Sitecore Search, are there any interesting features that you've come across with Sitecore Search that you want to touch on? You know, the tool itself is pretty robust. Is there anything that you think would be exciting for, you know, whether it's people that are implementing it, whether it's marketers, anything that you want to touch on or highlight that you feel like is pretty interesting to Sitecore Search as a whole?
Yeah, it has a lot of analytics and stuff in there. Information you can get. You can see like what people are actually clicking on for facets, what they're doing, maybe refine your search and stuff like that. They have some new beta features. Maybe at the time of airing this, it might not be in beta anymore, but they have some AI integrations that can give you suggestions and answers and stuff like that too. So you know, it's a SaaS product, so it's always evolving and there's new features and there's some other cool stuff. There's tuning. So like you can weigh certain fields higher than other fields to search against. Say like you have a title and you have some body content as some of your fields. You can weigh certain fields, maybe like the title higher than the body content, and you can control all of that stuff through the Sitecore Search console. You can also, you know, crawl PDFs. That's kind of cool. So like that's a pretty useful thing that we're
extremely
seeing.
Useful. Yeah.
Yeah. So like if you have a bunch of PDFs that you want indexed, you can start crawling those and doing that. You can boost results and stuff too, based on certain conditions. So it's really extendable and customizable, and you can make it do whatever your, you know, business requirements are.
Very cool. Yeah, that's always exciting when it comes to search, right? You want to make it when you have a robust tool that you can kind of learn from, and you know, it's something that you can iteratively build on, which is nice too. That like it's one of those areas that I feel like you don't have to do development changes to make changes in your search console. Your marketers can do that themselves based off of the learnings and the analytics that they're getting back on maybe what people are searching off of or what keywords that they're using, and things like that. So that's always an exciting kind of piece of any search tool, especially Sitecore Search. So
I think you're also like, when we're putting together these search products and we're talking about them and we're figuring out the requirements and then we're putting it together, when you actually like have search results coming back and you're demoing it and walking through it and looking at it with the client, then like maybe it's not showing the results in the certain way that you thought it would, or maybe a facet isn't as relevant as you thought it would be. And you can really like fine tune it and change it. And it's pretty flexible.
So then sort of wrapping up here, what would you say, you know, in the grand scheme of planning into implementation, as you've gone through a few of these, is probably the most important thing in your opinion to try to plan ahead for when implementing Sitecore Search?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the hardest thing, usually for what I've seen, is agreeing upon what are our sources, what are our fields, and what are our facets, and then what are those across all of the sources. Just figuring out, like, say we have predominantly have a bunch of product pages on our site, and we're searching against those. Like figuring out, like maybe it has a category, maybe it has a subcategory, maybe there's even a third category, and then just figuring out like. On the left side where all of your facets are, like, are users even going to make it down to the sixth facet?
Right.
Like what facets are actually important, what meets the business needs, and what makes it actually, you know, usable and a good experience and giving us good results back. So figuring out the facets, agreeing upon them across all of your sources, and figuring out like what fields need to get indexed.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. All right. And then I have one fun question for you as we wrap up. So we, as mentioned, Jared is in town at our AmericanEagle.com headquarters this week. And we've taken him around to quite a few Chicago staples to try to just, you know, try the Chicago cuisine. So I have to ask, if you had to compare Sitecore Search to one of the Chicago staple foods that you've tried so far, what would it be? Do you have any comparison if you had to say Sitecore Search is, you know, is it cheesy like the Chicago deep dish pizza, or, you know?
I mean, I like Sitecore Search. We've done it on quite a few projects now. I think it's It's good. It's reliable. I haven't been here enough to pick out my favorite beef sandwich. That's what you call them here?
Yeah. Italian beef.
Italian beef sandwich.
With the hot peppers.
So
You gotta
like
get the hot
by
peppers.
default right now, I have to say Portillo's is my favorite.
Okay.
But it's the only one I've had. But yeah, I would say that they're a beef sandwich because it's pretty good.
All right. There we go. Jared, thank you for joining us on the Sitecore Water Cooler today. I look forward to collaborating with you more, and we hope to have you back on the water cooler again soon. Thanks again to Jared Arnofsky for joining us today on the Sitecore Water Cooler podcast, a casual conversation between colleagues and peers centered around all things Sitecore. I'm your guest host, Maggie Burke, and until the next time we meet at the water cooler, be sure to subscribe to the Sitecore Water Cooler podcast today wherever you find your podcasts. This episode is brought to you by AmericanEagle.com Studios with special thanks to executive producers Renee Nelson, Julia Klepich, and Brian Winger.